Listen up, because in 1983, one man's mohawk and gold chains became Saturday morning's most unlikely hero. Mr. T went from bouncing at Chicago nightclubs to commanding an animated empire that pulled in millions of viewers every single week. But here's the thing. By 1986, it was all over. So what happened? How did the toughest man on television lose his grip on Saturday mornings? Stick around, because the answer is going to surprise you. In this video, I'm going to reveal 3 things. First, the genius behind how this show was created and why it worked so well. Second, the insane amount of money and merchandising that surrounded it. We're talking cereal, action figures, the whole 9 yards. And third, the real reason it all came crashing down, which had everything to do with changing regulations and cultural oversaturation. But before we get into all that, let me give you some context about just how massive this show actually was. Because trust me, this wasn't just another cartoon. Alright, so picture this. It's September 17th, 1983. Ronald Reagan is president, MTV is still playing actual music videos, and Saturday morning cartoons are basically the only thing kids have to watch. No streaming, no YouTube, no on-demand, anything. If you wanted entertainment as a kid, you woke up early on Saturday, and you planted yourself in front of the TV. And on that September morning, NBC premiered something nobody had really seen before. A celebrity-led animated series starring the hottest personality in America, Mr. T. We're talking about a show that ran for 3 seasons, produced 30 episodes, and became one of the few celebrity cartoons of the 1980s that actually lasted more than 1 season. Gary Coleman had a cartoon. It flopped. Chuck Norris had one too. Also didn't make it. But Mr. T, he dominated. The show was produced by Ruby Spears Enterprises, the same legendary studio that gave us Scooby-Doo. And here's something most people don't know. The character designs were supervised by Jack Kirby. Yeah, the Jack Kirby, the comic book legend who co-created Captain America, the Fantastic Four, and basically half of Marvel Comics. That's the level of talent they brought in for this thing. But what really made this show special wasn't just the animation or the celebrity power. It was the formula they created. A formula that combined action, education, and moral lessons in a way that parents loved and kids couldn't stop watching. The genius formula. So let's talk about what made this show actually work, because there was real genius behind it. The premise was simple, but brilliant. Mr. T played a gymnastics coach who traveled around the world with a multicultural team of young gymnasts. They called them the Gymnasties, solving mysteries and fighting bad guys. Think Scooby-Doo meets the A-Team, but with more backflips and life lessons. Now, here's where it gets interesting. NBC's president, Brandon Tartikoff, specifically wanted this show because the A-Team was absolutely crushing it in primetime. Mr. T's character, B.A. Baracus, was the breakout star, and Tartikoff realized that kids were obsessed with him. So he thought, why not capture that Saturday morning audience? But here's the thing. NBC didn't want to take any creative risks. They had a formula that worked with Scooby-Doo, and they wanted to stick with it. So when the writers, Steve Gerber and Martin Pasco, submitted 3 original and innovative proposals, NBC rejected all of them. They literally said, no, just give us the Scooby-Doo format, but replace the dog with Mr. T and a gymnastics team. And you know what? It worked. Each episode followed the same structure. The team would travel to some exotic location, San Francisco, Egypt, Hawaii, you name it, and they'd stumble onto some mystery or criminal operation. Then they'd use their gymnastics skills and teamwork to solve the case and catch the bad guys. Simple, repeatable, and it kept kids coming back every single week. But here's what made it different from every other cartoon at the time. The live action segments. At the beginning and end of every episode, the real Mr. T would appear on screen. Mohawk, gold chains, the whole package. And he'd talk directly to kids about the moral lesson of that episode. And these weren't just throwaway messages. Mr. T would look straight into the camera and tell kids about the dangers of bragging, or peer pressure, or even serious stuff like drug addiction and stranger danger. This was during the Just Say No era, and Mr. T was one of the most trusted voices telling kids to stay away from drugs. Parents ate this up. Finally, here was a cartoon that wasn't just mindless entertainment. It was actually teaching their kids something. And Mr. T wasn't just some actor reading lines. This guy had actually been a youth gymnastics instructor for government programs before his military service. He knew how to talk to kids, and it showed. Now let's talk about the team of characters, because this is where the show got really smart about its audience. The gymnasties were carefully designed to represent different backgrounds, so every kid watching could see themselves in at least one character. You had Jeff Harris, the cocky wise guy with the big ego. You had Woody Daniels, an African-American gymnast who wanted to be a lawyer. And this was actually Phil Lamar's first professional voice acting job. Yeah, the same Phil Lamar who went on to become a legend in voice acting. Then there was Robin O'Neill, the brave redhead who was basically the second in command. Kim Nakamura brought the brains with her photographic memory and computer skills. Spike O'Neill was the younger kid who idolized Mr. T so much he dressed like him and copied his speech patterns. And Sky Redfern was the Native American representative, voiced by Kathy Cavadini, who later became famous as Blossom in the Powerpuff Girls. The diversity was actually pretty progressive for 1983. This wasn't just tokenism. Each character had distinct personalities and skills that contributed to solving the mysteries. And the production quality? Top-notch for Saturday morning TV. The writing staff included Paul Dini, who later revolutionized superhero animation with Batman the Animated Series, and Flint Dill, who was a key figure in Transformers and G.I. Joe. The music was composed by Shuki Levy and Haim Saban. Yeah, the same guys who later created Power Rangers. This wasn't some cheap cash grab cartoon. They brought in serious talent because they knew they had something special. The merchandising empire. But here's where things get really crazy. The merchandising. See, the cartoon was just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. T was everywhere in the mid-80s. And I mean everywhere. The most iconic product? Mr. T cereal. Quaker Oats made a cereal with little T-shaped pieces, and it became such a cultural artifact that it even appeared in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. If you grew up in the 80s, you remember that cereal. Then you had the action figures. Galoob made 12-inch Talking Mr. T figures and 3.75-inch playsets. And here's something interesting. They marketed these figures as both generic Mr. T toys and as B.A. Baracus from the A-Team, kind of blurring the lines between his animated and live-action personas. There were lunchboxes featuring the team's orange bus and Mr. T's face. There was a 14-issue comic book series by Now Comics that tried to modernize the character in the early 90s. They even had him carrying a massive camcorder that thugs would mistake for a weapon, which is such a bizarre 90s touch. And of course, Halloween costumes. You know, those classic trash bag style outfits with the plastic masks that every kid wore back then. The point is, Mr. T wasn't just a cartoon character. He was a brand. And that brand was making serious money for everyone involved. NBC was happy. The toy companies were happy. Quaker Oats was happy. And Mr. T himself was reportedly making $80,000 per week from the A-Team alone, not counting all the cartoon and merchandising deals. By 1984, Mr. T was at the absolute peak of his cultural dominance. He was starring in a top-rated primetime drama, hosting a Saturday morning cartoon, making guest appearances on Saturday Night Live, and even headlining professional wrestling events. The guy was literally everywhere you looked. And the cartoon was performing exactly as NBC hoped. It was pulling in solid ratings, selling tons of merchandise, and most importantly, it was keeping kids glued to NBC on Saturday mornings, which meant they were watching all the other shows and commercials too. The show even got a special moment in 1984 when Mr. T appeared as Santa Claus at a White House event for Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign. There's literally a photo of Nancy Reagan sitting on Mr. T's lap and kissing his forehead. That's how mainstream and parent-approved this guy was. He wasn't just a tough guy character. He was seen as a genuine role model for American youth. The second season in 1984 expanded the show's scope with international mysteries. The team went to Hawaii, Egypt, Baltimore. They were globetrotting, and the adventures kept getting bigger. Episodes tackled more serious issues too, like eating disorders when Kim struggled with crash dieting in one episode. For a Saturday morning cartoon in 1984, that was pretty bold. Everything was clicking. The formula was working. The money was flowing. So, what could possibly go wrong? The fall. Well, here's where the story takes a turn, and it's not what you'd expect. The fall of the Mr. T cartoon wasn't because of one catastrophic failure. It was death by 1,000 cuts, And it all came down to three things: oversaturation, regulatory changes, and shifting industry standards. First, the oversaturation. By 1985, there was such a thing as too much Mr. T. The guy was literally everywhere. TV shows, movies, commercials, cereal boxes, toy stores, wrestling rings. And when you're that ubiquitous, the novelty starts to wear off. People started experiencing what I call T fatigue. The persona that seemed so fresh and exciting in 1983 was starting to feel played out by 1985. But the bigger issue was regulatory. See, there was this advocacy group called Action for Children's Television, ACT for short, and they were putting massive pressure on the FCC to crack down on what they called program-length commercials. Basically, they argued that shows like Mr. T, Transformers, and G.I. Joe were just 30-minute toy commercials disguised as entertainment. And you know what? They had a point. The Mr. T cartoon was heavily tied to Galoob toys and Quaker Oats cereal. Even though the show included educational content and moral lessons, it was still part of a massive merchandising machine. The critics saw right through it. By 1986, the regulatory landscape was changing fast. Networks were getting nervous about these celebrity vehicle cartoons that were so obviously designed to sell products. The FCC was paying attention, and nobody wanted to be the test case that got slapped with new restrictions. At the same time, the animation industry itself was evolving. Disney was about to launch the Disney Afternoon with shows like DuckTales and Adventures of the Gummy Bears, cartoons that prioritized storytelling and animation quality over celebrity power and merchandising. The bar was being raised, and the old formula was starting to look dated. So, in 1985, the third season of Mr. T aired with only 6 new episodes, half the number of previous seasons. The writing was on the wall. NBC was pulling back, testing the waters to see if the show still had legs. It didn't. Or rather, the network decided it didn't want to find out. By late 1986, NBC chose not to renew the series for a 4th season. They filled the time slot with reruns for a while, and then the show just disappeared from Saturday morning TV. And here's the thing. It wasn't because the show was bad. The episodes were still well made. The moral lessons were still valuable, and kids were still watching. But the cultural moment had passed. The regulatory environment had changed. And frankly, NBC saw better opportunities with other types of programming. Mr. T himself moved on. The A-Team was winding down, and he shifted focus to other projects. The cartoon became a memory, a piece of 80s nostalgia that would occasionally pop up in reruns on USA Cartoon Express in the late 80s and early 90s, and later on Boomerang. The legacy. But here's what's fascinating about the legacy of this show. It actually accomplished what it set out to do. The Mr. T cartoon lasted 3 seasons and 30 episodes, which made it one of the most successful celebrity-led cartoons of the entire decade. It outlasted Gary Coleman's cartoon, Chuck Norris's cartoon, and pretty much every other celebrity vehicle that tried to capture that same magic. It launched the careers of voice actors like Phil Lamar and Kathy Cavadini, who went on to become legends in the industry. It proved that you could combine action, education, and moral instruction in a way that worked for both kids and parents. And it showed that a persona born from urban grit and real-life struggle could be successfully sanitized and repurposed for a generation of youth without losing its essential appeal. The show's influence can still be seen today. Mike Tyson Mysteries, which premiered in 2014, is basically a direct parody of the Mr. T and Scooby-Doo format. A real-world fighter solving bizarre crimes with a dysfunctional team. The DNA is right there. And in 2011, Warner Archive finally released the first season on DVD, giving a new generation access to these episodes. People who grew up with the show could share it with their kids and say, this is what Saturday mornings used to be like. You know, looking back at the rise and fall of the Mr. T cartoon, what strikes me most is how perfectly it captured a specific moment in American culture. The 1980s were all about larger-than-life personas, bold aesthetic statements, and a very clear, almost parental sense of moral certainty. We wanted our heroes to be tough but caring, strong but educational, entertaining but safe. And Mr. T, with his gold chains, Mandinka mohawk, and tough love approach to teaching kids, embodied all of that perfectly. The show's fall wasn't really a failure. It was just the end of an era. By 1986, the culture was moving on. The regulatory environment was changing. The animation industry was evolving, and audiences were ready for something new. But for those 3 years from 1983 to 1985, the Mr. T cartoon was exactly what Saturday mornings needed. It gave kids action and adventure. It gave parents peace of mind that their children were learning positive lessons. And it gave Mr. T himself a platform to be more than just a tough guy. He got to be a mentor, a teacher, and a genuine role model. So that's the real story of the rise and fall of the Mr. T cartoon. It wasn't killed by bad ratings or poor quality. It was a victim of its own success, cultural oversaturation, and a changing regulatory landscape that made networks nervous about celebrity-driven merchandising machines. But you know what? For those of us who were there, who woke up early on Saturday mornings and watched Mr. T and his team of gymnasts solve mysteries around the world, it was pretty special. Whether he was punching sharks, warning us about jibber-jabber, or teaching us to respect our parents, Mr. T's animated avatar remains the definitive symbol of a unique era in children's entertainment. An era when a single man's charisma, combined with a mohawk and some gold chains, could command the attention of an entire nation's youth every Saturday morning. Alright, that's it for today's video. Now, if you enjoyed diving into this piece of 1980s nostalgia with me, do me a huge favor. Smash that like button, because it really helps the YouTube algorithm push this video to more people who grew up in this era. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because I've got a ton more videos coming about the shows, toys, and pop culture moments that defined our childhoods. We're talking He-Man, Transformers, G.I. Joe, all the stuff that made Saturday mornings legendary. And here's the big one. Share this video with your friends who remember waking up early for cartoons. I guarantee you know at least one person who had Mr. T cereal in their pantry or owned those action figures. Send them this video and let's get the nostalgia train rolling. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.